The room always sounded the same just before a high-stakes presentation. The soft turbine of the ceiling vents, glass carafes clicking against ceramic saucers. Chairs whispered back into place as people settled into their practiced versions of confidence. Elise had learned to read that soundscape the way an air traffic controller reads radar. Tiny deviations told you where the turbulence was. That Tuesday, the hum was off by half a note. It wasn't nerves. It was the presence of someone who didn't belong to the work. At 8:45, the clients filed in with the comfort of old habit. Marcus from Zenith Industries early as ever, thumb skating across his phone. Sarah from Apex Global trading updates about youth soccer schedules with James of Meridian Tech. Elise greeted them with the understated familiarity of a surgeon entering an OR. Everything prepared, everything calibrated, nothing left to chance. For 7 years, she'd turned crises into case studies and favors into futures. Those weren't accounts. They were living partnerships, seedlings she'd watered until they rooted so deeply the building itself seemed to rest on their trunks. On the wall, the projector threw a pale rectangle across brushed steel. The title slide waited, poised. Then the elevator opened with the slick punctuation of timing designed to be noticed. Prada heels. A voice tuned to carry. "Good morning, everyone." Talia Wexler, 24, MBA fresh enough to smudge, the CEO's niece, installed only 3 weeks earlier into a title that hadn't existed before. Executive Project Director, the kind of title you invent when blood outruns resumes. Elise's scalp prickled. She kept her smile. "Before we begin," Talia said brightly, "I made some last-minute optimizations to the deck. In a burn unit, firefighters don't enjoy hearing the word bonfire. In Elise's world, last minute held the same cheerful menace." She opened the revised deck on her laptop, and the trouble bloomed like ink in water. Slide 17, Cost Analysis for Zenith's Digital Launch. A decimal point had migrated, taking $7,000 and multiplying it by 10. The shape of the number did what shapes of numbers always do to people who manage budgets the size of small countries. It rewired posture, sharpened breath, pulled Marcus's gaze up from his phone like a magnet. "70 million?" he said, the room outing its first true silence. Elise stood. "There's a way to correct power without humiliating it. It's a narrow rope above a canyon, and you learn to cross it without looking down." "We should address slide 17, she said evenly. "The budget allocation line reads 70 million. The correct figure is 7. Talia flushed, the color moving too quickly across her composed face. "I don't think it's a decimal placement," Elise finished, steady and brief. "Here's the corrected model." She mirrored her screen. The original figures snapped into place like a bone set right. People who had given her midnight approvals and Sunday morning emergencies exhaled. Then the doorway added its own weather system. Donald Wexler stepped in, suit the exact shade of authority, eyes already measuring the angles of the room. He hardly came to presentations anymore. Delegation was part of his mystique. Today, his presence explained the false note in the hum. He saw his niece's humiliation spreading and caught it like a falling vase. "Perhaps a 5-minute break," he said, a velvet cord around a guillotine. In the hallway, Sarah squeezed Elise's arm as she passed. "Thank you," she mouthed. They all knew what almost happened. A misprint was a mistake. This was a catastrophe with a decimal point for a detonator. When the door closed, Donald's voice lost its carpeting. "Elise, a word." Talia hovered behind him, shaken into something harder. "You handled that poorly," he said. "I prevented a $7 million error," she replied, like reporting the weather. The rule in rooms like this is simple. Never apologize for stopping a train before the cliff. "You embarrassed a member of my leadership team," Donald said, and Elise saw it, the equation he truly believed in. In his math, perception outranked performance. power over ownership. He owned the room, she owned the relationships. Those currencies would spend differently before the week ended. They resumed with Elise's numbers, signed what needed signing, and if any gratitude surfaced, it was polite and quiet, the way gratitude becomes when it knows it's living under surveillance. Donald stayed to the final slide, a dark star at the edge of vision. When the clients left, Marcus lingered, hand on the back of a chair, like a man who'd nearly leaned too far over a balcony. "That was close," he said, then softer, "Watch your back." At 5:43 p.m., the email's subject line tried to sound neutral and failed. Urgent. HR meeting required. In 7 years, Elise had never received urgent from HR. Policy is for people who don't see the knife coming. She saved her files, backed up the folders your ethics teaches you to leave behind until experience teaches you not to, and walked to the floor where sympathetic decor softens the legal teeth. Jennifer from HR had the right face for endings, sincerely apologetic, strategically harmless. Donald sat beside her like the old gods in murals, impassive until lightning is required. There was no Talia. Messes make their own attendants. "We've had concerns raised about your leadership style," Jennifer said, tone calibrated to be admitted as evidence. "Reports of a hostile environment for junior executives." Elise almost smiled. The phrasing was so practiced she could hear the committee that wrote it. "From whom?" "This isn't about this morning," Donald said, making it entirely about this morning. "At will," Jennifer concluded, like a benediction in a church that worships the absence of cause. The escort arrived, Tom, who'd received coffee and kindnesses from Elise over Christmases and layoffs. She packed years into a box the way veterans fold flags, with reverence for what remains after impact. A joke mug from Marcus, client whisperer, a jade plant that had performed miracles under fluorescent winters, photos of retreats where Elizabeth had converted strangers into defenders without calling it that. She glanced at the camera in the corner, a small red light blinking like a patient heartbeat. Donald would watch this later. He would look for victory in the angle of her shoulders. She lifted the box and looked straight into the lens. 3 days, she said, a breath more than a whisper. Not bravado, a promise to herself. The elevator dissolved floors into reflection. At ground level, the city greeted her without ceremony. She sat in her car as the building loomed behind her like a past tense. The phone lit up with names that knew how numbers could burn. "What happened?" "Are you okay? Call me." Word moves fastest in industries that sell attention. She answered 2 texts, ignored 5, then called back the one that mattered. Marcus. "I'm out," she said. Simple, truthful. "That's insane," he said. "Over this morning? Apparently my leadership style isn't compatible with new team dynamics." Silence on a line can be loud. He said what the good ones say in moments like this. "Where are you going?" "Home," she said, "to figure out next steps." She didn't add, "I'm going where ownership lives." At home, the same coffee mug tasted different. The same skyline looked like a chessboard. She opened the laptop that wasn't subject to their systems and retrieved the insurance policy she'd never named out loud. Not files. She wasn't stealing the company's ideas. She was opening receipts of humanity. The times she'd met a deadline at a hospital, the schedule she'd quietly rearranged when a spouse started chemo, the Thanksgiving deck with edits every hour, so a founder could sit with his failing father and still approve a campaign that kept his company alive. The kind of ownership that outlives signatures. She read her non-compete the way she reads strategies, looking for the hinge. No solicitation of company clients for 12 months. Straightforward. But a law is what it says and what it doesn't say. Gavin, lawyer-turned-client-turned-ally, had traced the absent words for her months ago over martinis when Talia first appeared like a forecast. You can't call them. You can exist where they can find you. The cursor blinked over a new document. Not a pitch. She could recite the case law against that in her sleep. An announcement. Neutral, grateful, open. As of today, I'm no longer with Bridgewell. Here is my personal contact should you need anything during the transition. She didn't send it. Yet. Precision is timing arranged into consequence. Her phone pulsed with a secure ping. Talia just emailed everyone. She's taking your accounts. Transition meetings tomorrow. The vocabulary of conquest. Elise closed her eyes. The temptation to correct was an old habit, like tightening a screw that will never sit straight. She put the habit down. 3 days. Sleep arrived as if it had somewhere else to be. At 5 a.m., muscle memory woke her anyway. She brewed coffee and drafted lists. Clients sorted by renewal dates, pain points, and patience. Freelancers who could operate without needing to be taught how to think. Under one list, she wrote a single line. Power is granted. Ownership is earned. It read like a thesis. It felt like a map. By 7:55, she slid into a corner booth at a cafe far enough from Bridgewell to feel like a different city. Gavin was already there, suit immaculate, the kind of smile that appears when law is about to become leverage. "Calm looks good on you," he said. "Calm," Elise replied, "is just rage wearing better shoes." He opened her non-compete yellow highlights marking the negative space. You can't solicit, you can announce, you can be available. If they come to you because service declined, that's not you creating dissatisfaction. That's the market correcting a decimal. Outside, the city practiced its daily miracle of turning movement into purpose. Inside, Elise adjusted the world by a degree. Just enough that within 72 hours, mass would become momentum. Contracts live on paper. Loyalty lives in people. She didn't need to say it. The work would. When she left, her phone vibrated with the first wave, Sarah, then Marcus, then James. LinkedIn would see a neutral post at 11:00 a.m., scheduled to ride the industry's mid-morning scroll. It would be gracious and unspecific, and it would be more dangerous than anything Talia could improvise in a meeting room. The difference between power and ownership is simple to describe and costly to learn. Bridgewell would learn it by Thursday. Elise crossed the street, the light shifting green at the exact moment she needed it to. Timing, she knew, is both art and arithmetic, and she had always been very good with numbers. That first night as an unemployed woman felt longer than all the all-nighters she'd ever pulled at Bridgewell. The city's neon lights bled through her apartment windows, painting fractured geometry across her desk. Elise sat hunched over her personal laptop, the hum of its fan louder than usual, like a co-conspirator nervous about what was to come. She opened a folder labeled simply Insurance. Inside lived the careful hoarding of a realist disguised as a loyalist, project retrospectives, client feedback forms, annotated performance reports. More valuable than any of it were the private notes she'd written after late-night calls, the little details clients had offered in vulnerable moments. Sarah's daughter getting into Princeton, Marcus's wife battling cancer, James taking calls from a hospital room while his father slipped away. Elise hadn't stored these as leverage. She'd stored them because relationships were memory, and memory was the glue that outlasted contracts. Still, the weight of it pressed on her conscience. She wasn't the kind of person who plotted revenge in advance, but she was the kind of person who recognized when the rules had been rewritten without her consent. Donald had made sure of that. At 7:55 the next morning, Gavin was already in the cafe booth with 2 coffees steaming between them, annotated papers spread out like treasure maps. He greeted her with his lawyer's humor, dry but edged with loyalty. "You look calm for someone who just lost a 7-year kingdom." "Calm," Elise said, "is just rage with better table manners." He tapped the non-compete highlighted in bright yellow. "Here's what matters. You cannot solicit Bridgewell clients. Period. But nothing in here prevents you from announcing your availability or from clients contacting you on their own. The law punishes pursuit, not existence." He leaned back, eyes narrowing. If they're dissatisfied, that's on Bridgewell. You're just gravity. She exhaled. The words weren't permission, they were oxygen. For the first time in 24 hours, she felt the outline of possibility. At 11 a.m., she scheduled the post. The industry's mid-morning lull was perfect. Everyone scrolling between calls, grazing LinkedIn like sheep at a fence. Her announcement was polished to neutrality. 7 incredible years at Bridgewell, gratitude for partnerships, excitement for the next chapter. No bitterness, no hint of blood in the water, just precision. Within minutes, the ripples began. Her phone buzzed on the cafe table, then again, then again. Sarah from Apex Global, can we talk? Marcus, what the hell happened? Call me. James from Meridian, coffee today? And Patricia from Lux Cosmetics, blunt as always. Talia just sent me an intro email. She spelled our company name wrong, twice. Elise replied with surgical restraint. I'm taking some time to consider next steps, but I'm always happy to connect with friends. Friends, not clients. The line mattered. She typed it again and again, each repetition steadying the rope she had to walk. By evening, her spreadsheet, titled Stars, glowed with 17 names. 17 clients who, without her asking, had reached out with confusion, irritation, or a cautious hope. Each star was a flare against the night sky of Donald's arrogance. But it wasn't all triumph. Elise felt the sharp tug of doubt as she closed the laptop. She wasn't naive. Announcing her independence flirted with the gray edges of her contract. Even as Gavin's reassurances echoed in her head, a part of her still wondered whether she was orchestrating a coup or simply surviving one. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator tick like an anxious metronome. 3 days, she whispered into the dark. Not revenge. Not yet. But the beginning of a different kind of ownership. Day 2 began with the jolt of habit. Elise's body didn't understand that her inbox was gone. It still woke her at 5 a.m., still moved her toward coffee, still carried the pulse of deadlines that no longer existed. But this morning had its own agenda. By 6 o'clock, she was touring a shared workspace on the east side. Glass walls, rented plants, the faint scent of new carpet and stale ambition. Not glamorous, but functional, and more importantly, far enough from Bridgewell's shadow to breathe. The young manager at the front desk looked at Elise's name on the intake form, then blinked in recognition. Are you? She stopped herself, then smiled awkwardly. I saw your post yesterday. Fame in their industry traveled like electricity. Faster than contracts, more permanent than advertising. Elise signed the paperwork, and by 9 o'clock she had a desk, a key card, and the hum of strangers' conversations as the background to her resurrection. She didn't intend to build alone. Before lunch, she'd called Dana, a strategist whose brilliance Bridgewell had suffocated under layers of politics. Then Antoine, a creative director whose campaigns had won awards he never got to claim. By noon, both had joined her in the co-working space. They didn't need speeches. They saw the boxes on her desk, the look in her eyes, and understood. You're building something, Dana said, voice calm but certain. Not yet, Elise replied. Right now, we're just 3 consultants sharing Wi-Fi. But even as she said it, she felt the current running beneath the words. Meanwhile, Bridgewell was unraveling faster than she could have scripted. Clients messaged her with stories that would have been comic if they weren't so expensive. A Fortune 500 client told her Talia had suggested TikTok as the solution for their B2B software company. Another fumed that she had confused industrial drill manufacturing with social media marketing. And then came Marcus's message, the kind that could turn a wobble into a landslide. Emergency. Talia forgot to submit our renewal contract. Legal says we're technically out. Please tell me you have a copy. Of course she had a copy. Elise kept everything. Every negotiation, every revision, every addendum lived in her archives, tagged and cross-referenced. Still, the question pressed on her like a moral weight. Did she hand Marcus the documentation? Did she let Bridgewell's negligence do the persuading for her? She called Gavin. Hypothetically, she said, if a former client reached out because their new manager missed a critical deadline, what are my obligations? Legally, none. You're free. And if they decide to walk because their service collapsed, that's their decision. You didn't push, they fell. So Elise arranged to meet Marcus for coffee, neutral ground between their offices. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, the relief in his eyes almost painful when she slid the folder across the table. Every term, every condition, you saved me again. That's what partners do, she said, letting the word hang. Partners, not vendor, not agency, partner. The meeting wasn't a solicitation. It was survival written in the margins. When she left, she knew Marcus would draw his own conclusions. She didn't need to say more. Back at the workspace, Dana was already building a competitor analysis, Antoine sketching ideas on his tablet. Elise pulled up a draft she'd been refining for years, a framework she called the Customer Success Score. It was a simple but brutal system, measuring satisfaction through response times, outcomes, and depth of trust. It was everything Bridgewell had ignored, turned into a metric you couldn't bluff. That evening, she added 10 more stars to her spreadsheet. Patricia from Lux had followed up. Sarah from Apex hinted at dissatisfaction. A half-dozen others voiced frustration at Talia's so-called transition meetings. By midnight, the star count stood at 27. She poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking at the city lights prickling against the night. Somewhere out there, Donald was spinning explanations, Talia was practicing reassurances, and Bridgewell's board was praying the bleeding would stop. Elise smiled faintly, raised her glass to her own reflection. Day 2, she whispered, and the current's already shifting. Day 3 arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after fire. Elise woke before dawn, not out of habit now, but out of purpose. The plan she'd whispered into the dark 2 nights ago was no longer theoretical. By sunset, it would either prove itself or collapse entirely. At 9 a.m., her first call lit the screen. Patricia from Lux Cosmetics. Patricia didn't waste time. We're terminating with Bridgewell, she said flatly. Talia sent our confidential launch plans to our competitor. She doesn't even know what business we're in. Her tone was clipped, furious. Elise kept her own voice calm. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be sorry, be available, Patricia said. The unspoken hung between them. Elise couldn't solicit, but she didn't need to. Patricia had already leapt. By the time they ended the call, Lux Cosmetics was gone from Bridgewell's ledger, already halfway into Elise's column of stars. At 10:30 came the Zenith board. Marcus looked like a man carrying both relief and resignation. Our contract technically expired yesterday, he admitted, thanks to the renewal oversight. One board member scowled. $7 million a year, and they can't even track dates? Elise answered carefully, threading each word. When evaluating partners, track record matters more than promises. The older woman on the board nodded. The message was clear. Zenith's patience was finished. By noon, the most dangerous call of all began. Sarah from Apex had convened 9 clients on one video grid, their faces arranged like a jury Elise already knew. Joyce from Meridian, Ray from Sterling, leaders from firms she had shepherded through storms. They didn't dance around it. We're not happy, Joyce said. Yesterday's transition meeting was chaos. She called us some tech thing, another added, face tight with disbelief. Sarah leaned forward. Here's what we want to know, Elise. If a group of us needed something more, specialized than a giant agency can provide, What would you recommend? Every eye on the screen waited. Elise steadied her breath. I'd recommend choosing someone who wakes up thinking about your business, who celebrates your wins and loses sleep over your challenges. Someone who sees you as partners, not line items. A silence followed, thick, charged, before Ray finally smiled. Then I think we've found our answer. By the time Elise closed the laptop, 9 more stars burned on her spreadsheet. The count was surging. That afternoon, Bridgewell made its countermove. An email blast spread across inboxes. Exciting leadership update. Talia Wexler promoted to Senior Vice President of Client Relations. Elise's phone buzzed within minutes, clients forwarding it with sarcasm, disbelief, rage. If Bridgewell had set out to confirm every fear about nepotism, they had succeeded spectacularly. Promotion after 3 days of disasters? Dana muttered, reading over Elise's shoulder. That's not strategy, that's panic. Antoine shook his head, sketchbook abandoned. They've handed us the narrative. By 5 p.m., Elise's star count stood at 76. 76 clients who had signaled, some loudly, some quietly, that they were finished with Bridgewell and ready to follow her into whatever she built next. The industry press was already stirring. A newsletter pinged her inbox with the headline, Bridgewell faces client exodus amid leadership turmoil. Elise read it once, then closed her laptop. She didn't need confirmation from the press. The proof was glowing on her spreadsheet. 3 days. That's all it had taken to turn a termination into a reckoning. And tomorrow, the storm would break wide open. The morning headlines arrived like drumbeats of inevitability. Bridgewell bleeds clients after leadership gamble. 70 accounts in 48 hours. Elise read them with her coffee, each headline another reminder that the math wasn't personal. It was structural. But Donald didn't see it that way. To him, it had to be sabotage. And sabotage always needed a villain. By mid-morning, the threats began. Clients forwarded her the same email, dripping with false authority. Any attempt to replicate Bridgewell intellectual property will result in legal action. We have reason to believe former employees may be inappropriately influencing decisions. Violations of non-compete agreements will be prosecuted. It was the wrong play. Patricia from Lux called immediately, voice like steel. So now he's threatening me for leaving? After his niece handed our secrets to competitors? Marcus followed with equal fury. Donald's forgotten one thing. Clients don't like bullies. They'll burn the bridge themselves rather than be dragged across it. By noon, Elise's star count surged past 90. Bridgewell's panic had turned into an accelerant. Neutral clients who had been hesitating read Donald's email and made their choice. Threats don't bind relationships. They sever them. Then the call came she'd expected since Tuesday. Ms. Hartley. Donald's voice crackled through the receiver, brittle under forced calm. We should talk. There's nothing to discuss, Elise answered. You've orchestrated this, deliberately sabotaged. I've done nothing but exist, she cut in. Your clients made their own decisions. We'll sue. Tortious interference. Espionage. Try it, Elise said, calm as glass. Sue me for being trusted. Silence stretched. When Donald finally spoke again, the bluster was gone. What do you want? That was the moment she knew the ground had shifted. The man who'd sat beside HR with folded hands now sounded like someone bargaining at the edge of a cliff. Elise looked around her shared office, at Dana fielding calls, at Antoine sketching their new brand, at the future humming into being. I don't want anything from you, Donald, she said. I already have everything I need. The line went dead. By late afternoon, the exodus had a name. Industry newsletters called it the Bridgewell Bloodbath. Twitter turned it into a meme, decimal points, Comic Sans, and gifs of sinking ships. Former employees joined the chorus, posting their own stories. Leadership failures, cultural rot, years of credit stolen by executives who'd never earned it. That evening, Elise opened champagne in the co-working space. The cork ricocheted off the ceiling tile. Dana laughed. Antoine raised a glass. 96 clients had made their choice. Not all at once, not because of solicitation, but because the fragile loyalty to a logo had cracked, and they'd remembered who had really held their trust all along. For Elise, it wasn't victory yet. Victory wasn't just about who left Bridgewell. It was about what came next. Still, as the bubbles fizzed and her team toasted to survival, she let herself feel the quiet triumph. Donald had fired her to protect his niece. In doing so, he had given her the freedom to build something he couldn't control. And tomorrow she would begin. 6 weeks later, the rain traced silver threads across cafe windows, soft enough to blur the city into impressionist brushstrokes. Elise sat at the same corner table where she had once whispered, 3 days. But today the air smelled different, like paper and ink and possibility. In front of her lay incorporation papers for Hartley Strategies, the kind of documents heavy not with bureaucracy, but with birth. Dana and Antoine flanked her, no longer just comrades in exile, but partners in something real. Their team had grown to 12 in just over a month. Strategists, creatives, account managers who'd fled Bridgewell's collapse like sailors abandoning a ship already on fire. The roster of clients read like an industry summit. 96 stars had turned into 96 contracts, each one written in the ink of loyalty. "Before you sign," Antoine said, sliding his phone across the table, "you should see this." It was a LinkedIn post from Donald Wexler. "After 15 years, I've decided to step down as CEO of Bridgewell & Co. I'm proud of what we built and look forward to pursuing new opportunities." The comments underneath shredded the illusion. Former employees recalled decimal point disasters, Comic Sans emails, and intimidation tactics dressed as leadership. Clients recounted transition meetings where Talia couldn't pronounce their company names. Whatever dignity Donald hoped for had drowned beneath the truth. "There's more," Dana added. "Their earnings report just dropped, down 47% year over year. They've stabilized, but at half their former size." Elise smiled faintly. It took them years to build that revenue, 3 days to lose it. She signed her name with her mother's fountain pen, the one given on graduation day with the words, "For when you sign something important." As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text. Scan came back clear. 6 months, cancer-free. Celebrating with champagne tonight. Proud of you, darling. Elise blinked hard. For the first time since her firing, the triumph stung with something other than rage. This win wasn't just hers. It belonged to survival itself. Patricia from Lux arrived for their morning meeting, umbrella dripping rain. She shook her head, smiling. "Did you see the report? Bridgewell gutted, their reputation shredded. But you know what the difference is, Elise?" She tapped the table for emphasis. "You never treated us as accounts. You saw us as businesses, as people. That's why 96 of us followed. The number hung there, final and whole. 96, not just stars on a spreadsheet anymore, but a constellation that formed the map of a new firm. Elise had chosen not to chase every fleeing client. Quality over quantity, relationships over revenue. The creed. Bridgewell had forgotten had become her foundation. That afternoon, the receptionist buzzed with surprise. "There's someone here to see you, Talia Wexler." Elise's first instinct was dismissal, but curiosity, dangerous and stubborn, won out. Talia stepped in, no longer wrapped in designer armor. Jeans, rain-frizzed hair, humility she hadn't worn before. "I wanted to apologize," she said quickly. "I was in over my head. My uncle promised I'd learn on the job, but I only drowned. I know I burned bridges I can't rebuild. I'm not asking for a job. just advice, maybe mentorship. Elise studied her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw, maybe even honest. "One coffee," she said finally. "We'll see if you're serious." After Talia left, Elise stood at her office window. Her reflection stared back, straighter spine, steadier eyes, someone who had been forced to discover the cost of loyalty and the power of ownership. Donald had thought firing her was a victory. In truth, he had created his fiercest competitor, one who knew every client's heartbeat, every story, every unspoken need. He had gambled on bloodline and lost to trust. The rain eased, the clouds split, and sunlight poured over the wet streets, painting them gold. Elise whispered the truth she had carried since that Tuesday afternoon. The best revenge isn't loud. It isn't lawsuits or threats. It's building something better. Victory signs itself quietly, grows steadily, and survives completely. 3 days, 96 clients, one woman who refused to let anyone else define her worth. This was no longer a revenge story. It was a resurrection.